All right, today, so we're going to be going deep into the subject of triggers, essentially why you're triggered, what occurs when that trigger presents itself, and what it actually means. So I actually want to start here with a journal that I wrote earlier today, and then I'm going to expand on this journal, and you're going to get a good sense of specifically what am I talking about when I say triggers and what you can actually do about it, but how to make sense of it. Because typically speaking, when you get clarity on any given subject or topic, whether it's external to you or internal to you, you have a better idea of what to do with that information. Because effectively, what's happening is you're getting a perspective on the situation, on the problem, and as you understand the problem a little bit more in depth, a little bit better, you're more likely to be able to solve it because effectively you see what tools are necessary to solve the problem. Even if you don't have the tools necessarily, you still know specifically what needs to be done so you can be more aware of it in the future so that way you can prevent from future problems actually occurring. So let's go into it. So we're all here to lift each other up. Wherever we struggle, there's always someone who can help us through it. Everyone experiences their own unique difficulties, and in part, they know that their actions have contributed to their pain and suffering. In the past or present, our thoughts and actions create perceptions of the world, and those perceptions generate our internal state. Remember that any observation on you by someone else, judgment, criticism, accusation, that produces a negative reaction in you is probably a signal, can be a signal of some truth to that observation, because presumably you would not react very negatively if you thought there was absolutely no truth to that. You wouldn't be fazed by it. Perhaps you have that judgment's polar opposite as an ideal. So, say, for example, somebody calls you a coward and you're triggered by it. Perhaps your ideal is courage, is bravery. So perhaps you have that judgment's polar opposite as an ideal, or somebody calls you fearful. But as a matter of fact, you feel like you're loving, you're ambitious, you're courageous. Sometimes that could be the opposite of fearful. Then who is the judge? Is the judge the other person, or is it your own ideal that you fail to honestly pursue? Because think about it, if you were honestly pursuing it, if you were giving 100% effort every day to pursue that ideal, to live by your principles, to build your character, to do the right things to actually get there, then presumably you would not be too fazed by somebody else's judgment or accusation. The truth is sometimes revealed through a reflection of our own ignorance and insufficiency. Therefore, to not sink into anger and despair, we must have orienting principles. And the principles, that's the note, and the principles that we need to use to orient ourselves are principles that we can apply on a day-to-day basis. The problem when you set something too far off into the future is it feels like an indefinite period of time for you to actually get there. Now, here's the kicker. Here's the news that I have to break to you. You're never going to get there. You might obtain some kind of outcome, but getting there and feeling like you're finally fulfilled, you're finally at peace, that's probably going to come either in your golden years or on your deathbed, effectively. It's very unlikely that you're going to fully feel exactly where you need to be every single day of your life. You're going to have moments like that, and those moments should be enjoyed. But it's very unlikely that you're going to do that. You're going to have that feeling without doing things that put you in the right place, in the right state of mind, and in the right place existentially. So the right place internally and the right place externally, effectively. Now, again, you may not be in the right place externally, but if you're moving in accordance with certain internal principles and internal values that are aligned with a process that has a benefit to it, and it has an ongoing benefit that benefits not only you but other people as well, then you can kind of live true to that process because you know effectively that that is really what is going to create the life that you want to create. The reason most people fail, and I think a lot of people say this on the internet, is just they stop too soon. They stop trying too soon. And it doesn't even mean like a business. It just means in general, you stop trying to work on yourself, right? Like, let's say, for example, like, listen, therapy works for some people. For some people, it does work, right? So you might say to yourself, we don't even have to take therapy, but you could just take any example. And you could say, if you want to be good at something, you're going to have to do it every day. And if you stop too soon, you're not going to be good at that thing. And by not becoming good at that thing, or at least being good at being consistent in the pursuit of becoming good, you don't even have to be good necessarily. Just be good with being consistent with the process itself allows you to, first of all, apply that process to other things. So to apply that mindset, that discipline to other things, but also for you to see the fruits of your labor and to correct yourself when you recognize errors and mistakes. So when you do all of those things, it's very unlikely that you're going to be triggered by other people. The reason why is because when somebody says something to you, your internal reaction to what they say to you, especially if it's accusatory or if it's a criticism or if it's a judgment, is going to, it's what you're doing is you're projecting your defense mechanism on the other person to establish your boundary. So that this is the differential here, is that effectively what's happening is you're either establishing a boundary and or you're being triggered by something that is actually true. Both these two things can be true simultaneously. So what I'm trying to say is that sometimes when somebody's poking you repeatedly, or if somebody's overtly aggressive and you have to establish your boundary, either because you feel like it's either physically threatening or somehow it's threatening towards somebody, or maybe you could construe it as disrespectful, and what the implication would be if you're in a certain situation. As an example, you're going to do a business deal or you're around other people that you want to establish a relationship with, so that way perhaps it's a business relationships and you're being challenged by somebody else. It doesn't mean that you should immediately fall into their frame and engage with them in that challenge, because sometimes just pulling away and not really responding to it is the appropriate response. But there are other times where there are accusations that are being thrown that may need to be addressed for some specific reason. But this is the discernment that I'm talking about, right? You can only have that discernment between when you need to engage with somebody in a specific way to make sure that the argument that they're presenting, especially if it's false, is addressed in a very honorable way, in a very honest way. Because sometimes if somebody's accusing you of something and you feel internally triggered, but you don't respond to that trigger because you know it's true, you may just admit it. It doesn't mean that you don't say anything or you ignore them. You may just recognize it as being true, or you just may move past it as if nothing happened. So it's really about needing to generate awareness so that two things can happen. Number one, you're able to use that awareness to reflect on the situation, the experience after the fact, so that you can put all the pieces together, find out exactly what happened, right? The context, essentially the situation, that other person or these other people, and you, and how that played out and why it played out that way. And if it was favorable, and if it wasn't, try to make it favorable. So effectively, you're trying to find a way to make it help you. So how can I use that in the future? But what you want to do is you want to avoid blaming other people. It's because this person said this, or it's because I was in this situation that I reacted this way. Listen, part of it, that may be true. It may be true. It may not be false, but it's not necessarily going to serve you if you adopt that habit of pointing the finger. Because as you hear from everybody on the internet, what happens when you point the finger is you give your power to that source. So effectively what you're saying is, unless you change, I can't be different. So I need you to be a specific way. I need the environment to be a specific way for me to be the way that I want to be. So I can't be the way I want to be unless everything else changes. And that's preposterous, because you cannot control other things and other people. So make sure you take that responsibility. So number one, take responsibility. Number two, make sure that you're generating that discernment. So you're able to get clear on the situation, what is actually happening, how should you respond, right? And notice that if you're triggered, you're probably triggered because of an attack is being made that either is going to jeopardize your position, which you deem as important, say, for example, conducting a business deal, as the example I gave, or you're being triggered because there's some truth to the statement being made. I will say this, more often than not, it's typically that. It's typically that there is some truth to that statement, which is why we are triggered, because we don't need to respond. Think about it like this, right? It doesn't really matter. Does it actually matter? Like if you sit here in the silence of your own home, your You're with me right now. Are you really going to be triggered by much? Not really. Yeah, you might be triggered by your own thoughts, or somebody might say something on the internet that makes you feel inadequate. Like, let's say, for example, you're aspiring to be a professional soccer player, but you just got injured, and now you're watching Ronaldo play. You're going to probably feel even more depressed, right? So you have to be careful with what you consume, because what you consume should effectively give you the tools to be able to use your own discernment and think in the way that's true to you, not to somebody else. Because when you consume too much content of people constantly telling you to think a specific way or behave a specific way, say for example in the context of dating, of relationships, you'll hear different advice on how to be a man, how to be a woman. And those principles, they're not even principles. It's typically behavioral traits that the person is exhibiting in front of you. And you might think, oh, those things are something that I want to exhibit, because you've suppressed other traits. And now you're overcompensating by behaving a specific way. And you're not going to know that that isn't you, because you keep consuming that same content, because it is filling a part of you that you've suppressed and denied this, your whole life or for many years. So you have to bring those things to the surface. You have to unlock those dark caverns, as I spoke about in previous videos. Because when you start to unlock those, you start to understand where are your own insecurities, where are your own insufficiencies, where are your triggers, and why are you triggered. So you have to be able to self-reflect. And the only way that you can do that is if you have other people around you who tell you or advise you to turn your attention inward, but not inward in a selfish way, like it's all about you, but inward in, what am I doing? And how can I change? How can I change the way I think? How can I change the way I speak? How can I change the way I move, so that I can produce either this feeling that I want, or this experience that I want, or this life that I want? So remember, typically speaking, when you are triggered, it just means that somebody's unearthing something in you that you've suppressed or denied or moved away from. And you feel guilty about that. You don't feel good about it, because you know that you want to be behaving in the opposite way. Somebody tells you that you're a selfish person. Like, hey man, like imagine me telling you, like, you're selfish. You're a selfish person. Imagine if somebody told you that the way I just told you, that you're a selfish person. Selfish. You might even have like an internal reaction right now as I'm saying it to you. So you have to ask yourself, why are you having that internal reaction? If you were truly, and I don't think anybody can be truly selfless, but let's assume, like, if you didn't feel like you were selfish at all, then what would happen is you probably wouldn't be bothered by it. But if somebody told you in an accusatory tone, you're very selfish, and you knew that there was some truth to that, right? You might react. You might get defensive. You might attack the other person. But remember, it's not so much that happened, it's the awareness that you generate around it. Because sometimes you can't generate that awareness during the situation. It is ideal to generate that awareness during the situation, because you can adjust your behavior in real time, your behavior in real time. But if you can't, you should do it afterwards. Afterwards, you always need to reflect. Like, I always advocate writing and speaking and reading and putting things together, integrating yourself. That way you can generate more awareness, so that way you can actually prevent the situation from occurring in the future, or you can recognize it, recognize that situation, understand how you reacted, why you reacted that way, so that way you can make an adjustment in the future. And maybe if you're around other people who don't serve you and don't help you and are very negative or toxic, then you know what decision you have to make there. So keep one thing in mind. There are a number of reasons that people typically will become triggered, but typically they fall into those two categories, which is either it's speaking to some kind of truth within you that you either don't want to accept, that you've denied, because you're not living up to your ideal, or you're not pursuing properly that ideal, which is the opposite of what you're being accused of. Number two, you're being challenged in a situation that you deem as necessary for your survival or thriving, right? Somebody's pressuring you and you feel like you're being physically threatened. You know that if this person continues, then your life may be in danger. And so you have to really you have to advocate for yourself, and perhaps a more aggressive way. I'm not advocating for anything, but there may be, or like I said, you may be in a situation where you're at an interview, right? Say, for example, you do a job interview. It's like a very important job, and they're doing a group interview, right? And somebody mentions something that sounds very accusatory, judgmental towards you. At that point, you would have to address it, right? And it's not necessarily that you're triggered by that thing because you think it's true, but in that situation, other people's perceptions actually matter, because remember, there are situations that are instrumental to your progress. So you have to recognize those. So you have to have discernment to know when those two things are happening, because it could also be a combination of both. And then once you have that discernment, you'll know exactly how to respond in the future. And once you generate that awareness, it's going to do that after the fact, do that exercise after the fact, so you can recognize it in the future, so you can better understand yourself and know how to respond in a more effective way as you deem effective. So I hope that was helpful. I'm going to leave the video right there, and I will see you soon. As always, please leave a comment, any kind of comment you want, whether you liked it, whether you didn't like it, whether you have a suggestion that you want to make, whether you disagree with me, whether you want me to answer a question, you have a topic that you want me to cover in the future. Please feel free to comment that below. I respond to all the comments, and I will see you tomorrow.